said it to Liz earlier, it's like a busy honey beehive. All things moving and going around, but still sweet as can be. So today, I want to talk to you about self-trust. And I'm going to go through what self-trust means for me in my life and my journey with it. I'm going to tell you the story about my life. But before I do that, I want to pose a question to each and every one of you. Where you are right now in your life, knowing what you know, with that confidence and that trust of what you know in your experience, what advice would you give your younger self? Take a moment and think for that. Could be a word, could be a phrase, could be a quote. And hold on to that. We will revisit it towards the end. When I think about my younger selves, and there are many, I always start with this photo here. I had to be about 3 or 4. And of all the photos that I can choose when I give talks about my upbringing, I choose this one because this feels as close to what it felt like inside. There's photos of me smiling as a kid and laughing, but this one feels very close. So I grew up in a very divided home. One parent was a New Yorker, Spanish father, and the other one was a Floridian black mother. If those two opposites aren't enough for you, one was a Republican, the other was a Democrat. I know. But what really happened in my upbringing in that way is that, 1, I have no recollection of them getting along. 2, I got their respective versions of how they see life poured into me, verbally, visibly, so on, so forth, physically, you name it. And that swirled within my life every day, even at this age here. And then to zoom out of it a little bit, the external, extended family, I should say, was also letting me know about their respective sides. Spanish side let me know how Spanish I wasn't. I didn't speak Spanish. And don't get me wrong, they also were wonderful people to me as well. But sometimes certain family members weren't so nice. Oftentimes one particular would hold me down, squeeze my nose, because they wanted to make it pointy, because it was too round and flat. Conversely, the other side, the African American side, they gave me a lot of guff for, how do I say this, talking white. They didn't understand why I liked Jimi Hendrix. I wasn't even going to bring up to them that I love Beethoven. But with these two respective sides speaking to me, telling me about their tribes, if I may say, and who they were, what I essentially heard was, Cesar, you don't belong. So I couldn't instill any trust in one side or the other because I was hearing the opposite. And then neither were saying, you're like us. So where's the trust in that at this age? And now to compound on this, a point came that after my parents had split up, I was staying with one parent. The other one had been gone for some time, for some weeks. And then they barged in, grabbed my arm, and tried to take me with them. Now the other parent didn't like that, of course, and grabbed my legs. Now over the screaming, over the yelling, over the threatening, my body was a physical tug of war. I'm going to make a point here to stop and say that my relationship with my parents are good. now. They become different people, so have I. But let's talk about the psychological foundation that was set for me. I'm not here to blame them either, because blame brings up anger, and you're not going to live a good life if you're full of anger. But I'm here to find the cause of it. So psychologically, I grew up in a life that felt divided and fueled with anger. Now, what happens when you mix those two things together? I'll show you here. You get a 16-year-old gangbanger who's selling drugs, who's selling guns, who probably has a gun under that very long t-shirt made to hide said weapon. Take a look at this photo and you can see the malice, the threat, the anger. But if you really look, you see fear. You see sadness. I see longing for somewhere, someone I could trust. Over time, I put myself in a lot of situations. I was arrested, I was on probation, I hurt people, I was hurt. Every building I had to go into, I had to be mindful of all the exits to see who was walking in, because I needed to either fight or flight or both. And I'm 16 living in the South here, in Jacksonville, Florida. And I realized at some point, this is not it. The trust I put into the gang society or the street culture that I thought I would feel more safe and more a part of was setting up a landscape for me that wasn't working. I'm always stressed, I'm always on guard. Over time, I was fortunate enough that my probation ended. The people looking for me started having problems of their own, bigger problems even. The gang members in rival gangs, they either went to jail, they got religious, or they didn't make it. And I was isolated again. And this time, it was kind of a boon, because I was able to sit with the self and examine who I wanted to be. Now, I didn't have that answer, but I will say, I saved up some money, because I got a job, and by the time I was 20, I was able to buy a house. And I put trust in that home, that I could set myself up for security, for safety. I put trust there. But by this time, the entire city was a complete relic of childhood memories and teenage memories. There was no trust in that for me either. So, like any sensible person, I moved 3,000 miles away to a city that I'd never been to. I packed my stuff up and I moved to Los Angeles in 2014. I was 25 years old. And I thought to myself, great, here we are. This beautiful weather, these beautiful people, the amazing food, the culture, the dynamism. I can find my happiness here. And in that, I put my trust. Now, this photo was taken 4 years after I moved here. Do I look happy? The threat is not there anymore from the previous picture. The malice is not there anymore, but the fear is. The isolation still is. There's a longing in that 28-year-old's eyes to trust someone else. And of course, I'm a big believer in the fact that your beliefs influence your actions. And those actions go out into the world and affect the world. And that creates a phenomena that logic, science, and reason can't explain. And that's the dance that we have. The phenomena of the human experience met with the recording of it over time. So those actions put me in an environment that I shouldn't have been into, or been in, excuse me, with people that I shouldn't have been around. Other people who also were divisive, who didn't trust each other, who were aggressive. A couple weeks after this photo was taken, I was in a place like that, around people like that. And I was assaulted by a group of men. They jumped on me, and they beat me down and knocked me unconscious. And they didn't stop then. This next photo, I purposely made black and white for a reason. But it needs to be shown for the sake of the story. Fractured eye socket, fractured nose, 4 front teeth and bridge shattered, front of my tongue cut off, bladder punctured. They had to cut my stomach open, stitch my stomach shut, my bladder shut, and staple me closed again. As we talk right now, the scar tissue in my stomach hurts. I don't think that it'll ever not hurt. I pose the question to you again. Do I look happy here? I would say the exact opposite. I was suffering. And at this time, I was living a very dark life for the reasons I've mentioned before. And I'm going to preface by saying this. I was a very strict materialistic atheist. There's nothing wrong with atheism, but for me, it didn't bring out the best version of myself. I'm friends with a ton of atheists who are great people. It didn't do it for me. And then I realized how much suffering I had been causing in the world and had been caused to my own self. And I put trust in all these places to go somewhere to find joy and bliss and happiness. But here I am. And then I remembered that there is a lot to be said by the Buddhist monks about suffering. So after I was able to learn how to walk again, talk again, and eat again, I stumbled into a Buddhist temple. And I sat down. I put my hands together, and I closed my eyes. And through all the muck, all the mud, all the mess of what my life had been, I felt something that was like a glimmer of light somewhere down the way. And I didn't know how to grab it, but I stayed with it instead. And I showed up the next day and did it again. And then the next day again. And the next day again. And so on and so forth until finally my eyes opened up. And I realized that the narrative I was giving to myself, the trust I was looking for out there, was just a little off the mark. I recognized the fear and division and anger that I was giving myself was being projected outwards, and in that outwards I was still seeking some sort of peace, refuge. And this entire time, I recognized that not once did I check for the trust in my own self. Not once. In this moment, I recognized there's no geographical solution to an emotional problem. Over time, I did the work because of it. I meditated, work. Went to therapy, work. I cried endlessly. A lot of work. But I could feel these differences coming in. I found out who I was as a person, and I could feel this seedling breaking through the soil. Until finally, massive changes started happening. And then I was rewarded, I was gifted by a group of monks at my temple. For once, I trusted in my own self and applied myself in the manner of self-trust instead of external trust. And I got this very small reward of this upasaka robe from these monks. Do I look happy here? I see peaceful. I see calm. I see clear. I see a little more trust in myself. How about this next photo? You know, the Buddha was enlightened by 35, and he died at 80. That's a lot of talking. And he also ate, sat, and walked. And his assembly recorded what he said, by memory, of course. He said a lot of very cool things. But the three things that stick with me very often are quotes about the inner self. One of the first lines he says is, be a lamp unto yourself. Do not seek refuge in anyone else. Seek refuge in you. Second thing he says, which is one of my absolute favorite lines, is the seeker strives for themselves. The Buddhas, we just point the way. In those two quotes, it is baked in. It is implied that you already have what it takes. If I may, at any given moment, I'm listening to one of you tell me your situation. In that moment, you are Dorothy. I am the lion, the Tin Man. I am the Scarecrow. I'm walking with you along your journey. The moment I turn and tell you mine, the roles reverse. Now, I have no recollection of that movie of the three of them taking Dorothy and carrying her to Oz. She walked herself. That self-trust is laying within you completely. And I found that at some point in meditation because I pulled away the illusions that I gave myself. But it has to start within. And it's scary. Trust me, I'm aware. Joseph Campbell says, the cave you fear holds the treasure you seek. There's your note. Go inward first. Slay that dragon. Slay that minotaur. Slay that monster that lives within you. By the way, the word minotaur, the etymology of it is 3 different words. It's monir, monstrum, and monet. And individually, and if you put them together, it means to remind you of the divine omen that lives within and without. We spend a lot of time looking for the monsters out there, but we got to make sure that the one in here is met and tamed. The third thing that the Buddha says is, greater than the person who will conquer 1,000 upon 1,000 men is the one who will conquer just one, themselves. There's your line again. For me, the meditation did that. And in no way am I trying to convert someone to Buddhism. That's actually the opposite of what we want. We're not interested in that. We're just here to remind you that you already have it. I don't have anything to give to you. I'm just pointing the way. And in the same manner in which you find your version, you point the way to others. And now I stand here today with this level of self-trust, remembering that joining a gang, buying a house, moving 3,000 miles away was secondary. All I had to do was sit, close my eyes, and be with myself. And now, this child is with me every day. This child trusts me every day. That teenager trusts me. I know the advice I would give him if I could speak to him. I would tell him he's safe, safer than you think. Now, once we have that, that's when we start to share with each other. That's where we are in this world. That's who we're supposed to be in this world. But we got to start within first. Frankie Beverly says this great line. He's a musician. He says, if you get confused, don't go nowhere else. You'll find all that you need right there in yourself. That's Buddha consciousness right there. And as per Buddhism, we are all manifestations of Buddha consciousness. Once we peel away the fear, the worry, the divisiveness, then we find that. Buddha means one who woke up. It's not designated to one individual. So go out and do that with each other. And if you feel so inclined, if this resonated with you as well, I want to share with you this QR code that goes to my website, and I share newsletters that remind us of these things. And I share data source good news in the world, because we got a whole news source that's showing us not so good things, divisive things. But actually, there's amazing things happening in this world. And there's also information how we can contribute and help each other out. So finally, in closing, I want to say to you, in remembering that initial question, where you are right now, what advice would you give your younger self? Whatever that answer was, you trust that answer. Because time changed. Because you saw more things. Because you changed. Your beliefs, your thoughts, your actions, they changed over time. Your awareness, your consciousness, however, has been eternally the same. And that's who you really are. So when you answer that question of the advice to your younger self, I want to pose to you a second question. Who you are right now, with everything you know, and the place you are in your life, what advice do you think your future self would tell you today? You keep that with yourself if you like, or share it. But most importantly, seek your self-trust. That jewel is waiting to be found. And it's right where you're sitting. My name is Cesar Cardona. Thank you all so much for your time.